Hello everyone, welcome to this online class. I will explain to you the theory of the gerund, so how one forms a gerund and how one uses the gerund in different contexts in the English language. This online class will start with this instructional video, and after this video, you will have to make the exercises in your course book Praktische Grammatica. You will also get an extra set of exercises that I will provide for you on Smart School via the platform Hot Potatoes. Maybe you are familiar with that platform or maybe you aren't. And a moment of live feedback will also be included at the end of this class. So I hope this class is clear to you and I wish you a lot of good luck. The first question we can ask ourselves is, what is a gerund? Well, gerunds are words that are formed with verbs, but they act as nouns. For example, swimming is my favorite thing to do. Swimming here is a gerund and functions as a noun. How is a gerund formed? Well, you take your verb and you place ing at the end of your verb. For example, sleeping, dancing, cooking. This is not very hard to do. Now we will look at all the different contexts in which a gerund can be used in the English language. The first context is a verb plus a gerund. If you want to know how we do this, move over to the next slide. Okay, so now we will look at all the different functions a gerund can fulfill when it is placed with a verb in a sentence. If you look at number 1, you can see the first function. So a gerund can be the subject, het onderwerp, or the direct object, het leidend voorwerp, of a sentence. For example, swimming is good for you. Here we have a gerund, swimming, and this is the subject. Zwemmen is goed voor je. I like traveling. Here we have a subject I, so het onderwerp is I, but you like something and that is traveling. So here we have the gerund as a direct object. So the first function, a gerund can be a subject or a direct object. If you then look at number 2, you can see that we also use the gerund for typical Dutch constructions. We often say in Dutch, ik mis het om te zingen. We don't say in English, I miss it to sing. No, we say, I miss singing. And the verb singing here again is a gerund. You can also say, for example, ik stel voor vroeg te vertrekken. We don't say, I suggest to leave early. We say, I suggest leaving early. So we again use a gerund. So when you say in Dutch om te or te, we use a gerund in English. Another example, vind je het erg om even te wachten? We say, do you mind waiting? So we again use a gerund for these Dutch constructions. If you look at number 3, we see that the gerund can also fulfill other constructions in Dutch. When you, for example, say, ik hou van koken, rijden of reizen, we say in English, I like cooking, driving, traveling. So we use a gerund again. And then if you look at number 4, we have a list of verbs that are followed by the gerund. So this is just a list of verbs that you can study by heart. And something that may help you to study these verbs is that a lot of these verbs express a preference, een voorkeur, disapproval, afkeur, or to continue or to stop. So maybe in Dutch. Dus dat is hier eigenlijk een lijst van werkwoorden die sowieso gevolgd zijn door de gerund. En heel veel van deze werkwoorden drukken dus een voorkeur of een afkeur uit of betekenen doorgaan of ophouden. Wat wel belangrijk is om te weten en om te zien, is dat sommige werkwoorden met een sterretje staan. En dat betekent dus dat deze werkwoorden ook kunnen gevolgd worden door een infinitief met to. Bijvoorbeeld het werkwoord like. Je kan zeggen I like dancing. Maar je kan bijvoorbeeld ook zeggen I like to dance. En om het verschil te weten wanneer je dus een infinitief of een gerund moet gebruiken, dat zien we verder in deze PowerPoint. Dus dat is voor later. Maar werkwoorden die dus sowieso gevolgd worden door een infinitief en dus niet door een gerund, zijn werkwoorden met would. Bijvoorbeeld would like, would love, would prefer enzovoort. Dat is altijd I would like to dance en niet I would like dancing. Dus die worden sowieso wel gevolgd door een infinitief met to. Okay, now you are ready to make the exercise. Okay, so in the first part of this presentation, we saw that a gerund can be placed with a verb, and now we will look to the second context in which a gerund can be placed, and that is with a preposition, een voorzetsel. This is quite easy to explain. You have to remember that after a preposition, so after een voorzetsel, the verb always has the form of a gerund. Okay, so examples of prepositions are about, against, at, in, of, and so on. After these words, a gerund always follows. Now we will look at the different contexts in which a preposition can be placed. So if you take a look at number 1, a preposition can be accompanied by an adjective, een bijvoeglijk naamwoord. So for example, good, afraid, tired, interested. And then a preposition follows. So for example, good at, afraid of, tired of, I'm interested in, okay? So after these constructions, a gerund follows. If you look at number 2, a preposition can also be accompanied by a noun, een zelfstandig naamwoord. For example, the advantage of, chances of, the idea of, or reason for. And then again, a gerund follows. If you look at number 3, preposition can also be placed with a verb. So to talk about, to think about, to decide against, to apologize for. And then again, a gerund follows. In number 4, you can see the verbs to look forward to be used to, and to object to. Well, after these verbs, a gerund follows and not the infinitive. So when you, for example, say, I'm looking forward to meeting him again, or we are used to having a lot of snow, they objected to sitting at the back. So we use gerunds here. So you may want to highlight these verbs and study them by heart, that after, or that these verbs are placed with a gerund. If you look at number 5, the gerund is also placed with certain expressions. For example, the expressions how or what about, or be worth or feel like. So also highlight these verbs and study them by heart in order to remember that these are also placed with a gerund. So for example, what about going? It's not worth waiting. I feel like going for a walk. So yeah, these expressions also need a gerund. And In number 6, you see the prepositions before, after, by, instead of, and without. So in number 1, 2, and 3, we saw that prepositions um, are very likely to be placed with, for example, a verb or a noun or an adjective. But here we have single prepositions, like we just have before, we just have by, we just have instead. It's not placed with a noun or an adjective or a verb. Um, but these prepositions, so before, after, by, instead of, and without, they also have a gerund. So also highlight these prepositions and study these um, words by heart to remember that these are placed with a gerund. Now you can make the exercises on page 61. Remember that I told you in the first part of this presentation that I was going to explain whether to use an infinitive or a gerund? Well, this is the moment. So I am now going to explain whether to use an infinitive or a gerund. Okay, so the first thing you have to know is if you look at number 1, you see a list of verbs, and these verbs are always placed with a to infinitive. So as you can see, I want to go. You don't say I want to going. So we don't place a gerund, but we place an infinitive. We can't afford to go. Okay, so you can see those verbs. Those are examples of common verbs with a to infinitive. So to offer to learn to manage to do something, and so on. So these verbs are placed with to and an infinitive and not a gerund. And I also added would plus verb, as you can see on slide 6. Um, so if you have, for example, I would like to, you also have an infinitive and not a gerund. So if a verb is placed with would, we also have an infinitive, and that is why I have added would plus verb. So maybe you can note that down somewhere so you don't forget. If you take a look at 2a, we there have some verbs that can be placed with an infinitive but a gerund as well, without any difference in meaning. So when you, for example, say I started to yawn or I started yawning, there's no difference in meaning, okay? Because if we translate that sentence, we just say ik begon te gapen, okay? And if you use a gerund or an infinitive, there won't be any difference. It's just ik begon te gapen. So you can use both forms. And the same goes for example, I like to lie or I like lying in bed. So you can use both of the forms. If you look at 2b, we also have verbs that do carry a difference in meaning, dus een betekenisverschil, when you use an infinitive or a gerund. So, for example, let's take the first verb, remember. I must remember to phone Anne. Ik moet eraan denken om Anne te bellen. Here, remember has the meaning of ergens aan denken om nog iets te doen, you know. Ik moet eraan denken om Anne te bellen. So we have a to infinitive, to phone. Ik denk eraan dat ik dat nog moet doen. But if you look at the second sentence, with the same verb, remember, I remember meeting Anne in London in 2005. We don't have a to infinitive like we had in the first sentence, but we have a gerund here, okay? And if we translate, ik herinner me nog dat ik Anne in 2005 in Londen ontmoette. And here the verb remember has a different meaning than remember in the first sentence, because here remember means ik herinner me dat nog. And the reason for that is because we used a gerund and not a to infinitive. So that actually realizes a different meaning when you use an infinitive, like to phone, or a gerund, like meeting. Another example, the verb to stop. So I stopped to send a text. Ik bleef staan om een sms te sturen. So we have stopped, and we place a to infinitive after the verb stop, namely to send. Here, stop means blijven staan. Ik bleef staan om een sms te sturen. But if you look at the second sentence, I stopped buying newspapers last year. Here we use a gerund. We don't use a to infinitive, but we use a gerund, namely buying. And if we translate this sentence, we have ik ben vorig jaar opgehouden met kranten kopen. So here, stop doesn't mean fysiek blijven staan, like in the first sentence, but it means ophouden met iets te doen. So this is how your choice of placing an infinitive or a gerund after one of these verbs, this is how you actually create a different meaning to your sentence. So if we look at the summary, so first of all, you do have verbs like afford, expect, offer, seem. You can just look at the list that always have an infinitive, that never have a gerund, okay? Secondly, there are verbs that can have an infinitive or a gerund. So verbs, for example, like begin, start, love, hate, prefer, like, and so on. These can have a gerund or an infinitive and won't have any different meaning. Dus als je deze werkwoorden gebruikt en je plaatst een infinitief of een gerund na deze werkwoorden, dan zal je geen betekenisverschil hebben. But we also have verbs that do create a different meaning when you use a gerund or an infinitive. And those verbs are remember, forget, stop or mean. Dus als je bijvoorbeeld het werkwoord remember hebt en je plaatst een infinitief erna, dan zal het een andere betekenis hebben dan als je bijvoorbeeld een gerund erna plaatst, zoals we al hebben gezien. Now you can make the exercises on page 63.